Many people face the problem of high blood pressure. Or, what did they used to call high blood pressure? I think blood pressure is easier to understand. Some people see this problem as age-related. And they say, listen, it's just age, so as a person gets older, their blood pressure goes up because of that. At the same time, we know that this definitely doesn't happen to everyone, and there are a huge number of older people who have absolutely no problems with blood pressure. Some people link it to sports and say those who are active in sports have normal blood pressure, and those who don't exercise, well, as they get older, that's when these blood pressure problems start to appear. Others say, listen, no, it's all about nerves. And it's precisely because of nerves and stress that high blood pressure, arterial blood pressure, develops. That's it. But there are people who get nervous and still have normal blood pressure. And there are people who don't get nervous, seem to feel fine, live without stress, and yet their blood pressure fluctuates. So we need to figure this out, because recent data shows that the gut is involved in this, as well as food and the microbiome. A recent news item actually sparked our conversation because the journal Hypertension, well, that's hypotension, meaning high blood pressure. That's what it's called in English, hypotension. It sounds like high potency, but in reality, it means high blood pressure. They presented a study published in that journal which showed that the microbiome and flavonoids from various foods actually play a key role in affecting the heart. And so there are different situations we can consider here. Let's look at two scenarios. The first scenario is when a person already has high blood pressure and is taking some kind of medication for it. In this case, you can improve the situation with the help of the gut, food, and microbiome. It's not guaranteed that you'll be able to avoid it completely, although that's possible too. There's another story. A person may not have high blood pressure, but they can avoid these problems in the future if they take care of their gut, microbiome, and diet. These are some really interesting findings. It turns out that 15% of the protective effect for the heart from berries and red wine is explained by the presence and activity of certain gut bacteria. And that's a very significant and substantial contribution. And it's surprising that those flavonoids, this so-called group of complex molecules, beneficial substances that supposedly carry all the heart-healthy benefits from food, actually are barely absorbed by our bodies. In other words, we eat them, but basically they would just pass right through us. But now, according to research, it turns out that they reach the large intestine, almost the very end of our digestive tract. In their unchanged form, just as we ate them from fruit, they aren't even digested. They make it to the large intestine and there become a gourmet meal for our beneficial gut microbiota. It's like a Michelin star meal, and these bacteria living inside us break down those very flavonoids into small, accessible molecules. And these small, accessible molecules are then absorbed, have a powerful systemic effect, and can even lower blood pressure. So, as it turns out, an interesting question comes up. What kind of food, how much of it should we eat, and how much does it actually lower blood pressure? So our German colleagues analyzed more than 1,000 people and compared their diets, the composition of their gut microbiota, and their blood pressure levels. Here, we need to make a small remark. When we look at an individual person, their blood pressure can drop significantly, or on the contrary, rise significantly. And the numbers can fluctuate by plus or minus 20 millimeters of mercury. Let me remind you that we have systolic and diastolic blood pressure, commonly referred to as the upper and lower numbers, as people used to say. Two numbers, 120 over 80. 120 is the upper or systolic value, and 80 is the lower or diastolic value. But if we look at one specific person, the numbers can seem very large. It went up by 20 millimeters, it went up by 50 millimeters. But if we analyze it statistically, even a change of 5 millimeters of mercury in research studies is already a significant number, because for a specific person, that can turn into an even bigger number. So it turned out that the results were, first of all, concrete, and second, truly impressive. Berries. Just ordinary, simple berries. 1.5 servings a day, that is about one small bowl or 1 cup, are statistically and reliably linked to a reduction in systolic blood pressure by 4.5 millimeters of mercury. And this happens thanks to the gut microbiota. And red wine, 3 glasses a week are associated with a reduction in blood pressure by 3.7 to 4 millimeters of mercury. And that's also a significant number by research standards. And again, it's because the gut microbiota processes these substances and affects blood pressure. But of course, we're talking about moderate consumption of red wine, because in large amounts, if we're talking really large amounts, there's definitely a risk of heart attack or stroke. That does happen. But microdoses of alcohol are pretty harmless and even turn out to be beneficial when it comes to blood pressure. Specifically, it's because red wine contains resveratrol and anthocyanins, not ethanol. But then the question is, why does this happen if we see it in research results? So how does this actually work, it turns out? It turns out there's such a thing, the food microbiota vessels axis. Food affects both the microbiota and the blood vessels. And if we imagine this as a kind of chain of mutually beneficial cooperation within our body, it looks something like this. We eat some food that's rich in these very flavonoids. Berries, apples, tea, cocoa, red grapes, onions, red wine. We eat all of these. These foods contain flavonoids, which reach the large intestine where they serve as a prebiotic. A prebiotic, meaning not a universal food for everyone, but a selective food for specific and certain types of beneficial bacteria. Certain types of lactobacilli and certain types of bifidobacteria. The bacteria consume and ferment these flavonoids and produce fairly simple small molecules, such as hippuric acid or protocatechuic acid. In other words, metabolites. These metabolites, this all happens inside the gut, are absorbed into the bloodstream through the intestine, enter the body, and have a systemic effect, meaning they impact the entire body. And what happens then? The function of the endothelium, the inner lining of blood vessels, improves, which helps them dilate. This has a positive effect on the cardiovascular system, and for many people, it's probably important for potency as well. Next, they reduce oxidative stress. They suppress chronic inflammation, and that's both oxidative stress and chronic inflammation. These are the key drivers and engines behind both hypertension and atherosclerosis. They also alter the activity of enzymes that affect vascular tone. And this has been proven in studies. So it turns out that a healthy and, most importantly, diverse microbiome acts as a natural booster for the beneficial properties of food. By the way, recent modern studies show that people with high blood pressure have something going on in their gut. There's a specific pattern, a kind of unique microbiome profile. There is a significant decrease in bacterial diversity, and it's not just a general lack of what we usually call beneficial bacteria, but specifically a shortage of those bacteria that are supposed to ferment these very flavonoids. That's why we need to nourish these bacteria, because in people with hypertension, it creates a vicious cycle. Hypertension itself leads to disruptions in the gut microbiota, reducing its ability to absorb and provide the body with nutrients, those very same flavonoids. Because of this, hypertension gets even worse and blood pressure rises even more. As a result, people have to increase the dosage of some blood pressure medications, and basically they just can't get off them. We need to identify for ourselves a sort of top list of flavonoid sources and determine what benefits they offer. Well, as they say, not all flavonoids are equally beneficial. And each class of these flavonoids is a little different, and they're found in different foods. Take anthocyanins, for example. They're pretty blue in color, so they're easy to spot. And they're found in blueberries, again, that dark purple color, blackberries, raspberries, though a bit less, and cherries. Red cabbage, black rice, basically anything that's dark purple. They have a very strong, even maximal effect on systolic or upper blood pressure, and they improve cholesterol profiles. Another group, for example, is flavonoids. They're mostly reddish-orange in color, and this includes citrus fruits, those familiar oranges, grapefruits, and lemons. They actually have pretty good anti-inflammatory properties. And they affect the elasticity of blood vessels. If blood vessels are elastic, they cushion arterial pressure so it doesn't rise as much. There are also flavonols. These are found in onions, especially red onions, cocoa, black tea, green tea, apples, and broccoli. They, of course, provide powerful antioxidant protection. And they reduce the ability of platelets in the blood to stick together. In other words, they help prevent blood clots from forming, or as many people incorrectly say, they thin the blood. Now, another story, these are flavones. They're found in parsley, celery, black pepper, and hot peppers. They specifically affect the inner lining of blood vessels, known as the endothelium. And the king of these is resveratrol, which is found in red grapes, red wine, but also in peanuts and blueberries. It has a powerful anti-inflammatory effect, and resveratrol also activates longevity genes, the so-called sirtuins. So now we know why this happens, that blood pressure really does go down, and all that's left is to come up with some practical steps to feed our bacteria. And by doing this, we can slightly lower our blood pressure or prevent it from rising. Our strategy in this context should be twofold. First, on one hand, we need to add more flavonoids so there's enough material to produce these beneficial substances. On the other hand, we need to improve the state of our gut microbiome so there are bacteria to convert these substances. So the simplest practical step, number one, is to add a handful of berries to your daily diet. Frozen berries have just as many flavonoids as fresh ones. So there's really no difference here. If you want, use frozen berries. If you want, use fresh ones. Add them in the morning to your oatmeal, yogurt, smoothie, wherever you like. Just add them. Now, the second thing is you need to add more color variety. The more variety of flavonoids you consume, the better. You don't have to do this all in one day. You see, a lot of people try to have something purple in the morning, something orange at lunch, something green at dinner, and then 2 more colors. There's just no way to fit it all in. So you can spread it out over the week and create a weekly palette. For example, on Monday, eat more green vegetables. On Tuesday, more red ones. On Wednesday, more purple ones. Or you can come up with some kind of rotation like that. So it's not necessary to cram all of this into your daily diet. You can do it over the week. Step 3. Of course, you should drink quality tea. Black or green. Both are good sources of flavonoids. Just not too much. 2 or 3 cups, otherwise it'll be too much. And you definitely shouldn't brew it with boiling water like we usually do. Boil the kettle, it heats up to 100 degrees, and then we just pour it straight into the tea. That kills all the flavonoids. To preserve as many antioxidants in the tea as possible, you need to let the water cool down a bit. Let it cool a little, at least down to about 80 degrees, and that's the temperature you should use to brew your tea. Fourth, here's something else you can do. Dark chocolate. 70% cocoa, 80%, 90%, but just a little bit. 20 to 30 grams a day is just one small piece from a chocolate bar. Take a whole 100-gram chocolate bar and divide it into 5 pieces. If you divide it into 10 pieces, that's a 10-gram piece. And you eat 2 pieces, it's good for your heart, and it also brings some pleasure if you really savor it. Moving on. The 5th step we can take is to add something. Probiotics and prebiotics. Ideally, of course, you should add them intentionally. Specifically, the ones that target this particular link. And here, choosing the right ones can be tricky. Well, prebiotics can help us specifically in the context of the needed flavonoids, onions, garlic, asparagus, bananas, and whole grains. As for probiotics, we're talking about the bacteria themselves, like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, kombucha, or homemade yogurt without sugar. Of course, you should ultimately minimize everything that harms your gut microbiome, like excess sugar, refined empty carbs, processed foods, and ready-made meals. But it's worth mentioning that the effect of flavonoids can vary a bit. And this difference isn't because your body's different. The difference comes from the fact that you have different bacteria in your gut. And if your gut bacteria aren't very good at processing these flavonoids, the effect will be less than for someone else whose microbiome is better developed in that area. That's why different people benefit from these foods in different ways. And that's also why universal diets work differently for everyone. But the good news is that this is something you can fix. Basically, everything we're talking about has actually become possible and accessible thanks to new research and new technologies that allow us to examine the microbiome in detail and choose targeted solutions for these problems. And you can see the amazing results we're getting. The research is ongoing. And now we also know about the benefits of those very metabolites from flavonoids. And there are certain flavonoids, or rather their metabolites, that can cross the blood-brain barrier. And so if we consume more of them, it reduces the risk of both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Because they suppress inflammation in the gut and in the brain, the so-called neuroinflammation, the future looks promising. It's already available now. It turns out that there are already special tests for the microbiome. Well, not all tests are the same, of course. That's why there are some that allow you to individually select both probiotics and prebiotics, as well as diet, and of course, you should use them. And we know that this will affect not only the brain, not only the heart, not only the blood vessels, but also blood sugar, diabetes, insulin sensitivity, and even certain types of cancer. And it'll help prevent these things earlier. We didn't know about this, we thought it was just an individual trait, but now we know that it's the microbiota, which is different for everyone. But it should be ideally balanced, so we need to do everything we can to strive for that. But overall, you see, this research we're talking about today is changing the paradigm. We used to think that the substances found in food, including flavonoids, were like ready-made medicine. And so when some of these substances were isolated, it turned out they didn't really work that well. Because for them to work, you also need to have a healthy microbiota. So it turns out that these foods and many of the active substances in them aren't actually active substances themselves, but just raw materials or resources for our microbiota. And our microbiota is like a factory that produces our own internal medicines, which help us solve various problems. Of course, the health of our cardiovascular system is, among other things, a reflection in the mirror of the health of our gut and microbiota. Similarly, as it turns out, there are similar stories with the liver. Its condition is a reflection of the gut microbiota. So here's the provocative question for us. Please write what you think about this in the comments. I will definitely read and look through them. And what if, in the future, let's imagine for a moment, treating hypertension and high blood pressure won't start with daily blood pressure monitoring and prescribing pills that just lower the pressure without addressing the cause, but instead it will actually begin not with a pill, but with an analysis of the gut microbiota and the prescription of a special personalized set. Probiotics or prebiotics to adjust the gut microbiota, activate the body's own defenses, and lower blood pressure by 10, 20, or even 30 millimeters of mercury. What do you think of this idea? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Our daily food choices aren't just about proteins, fats, and carbs, what people call macros, but it's really about how our internal ecosystem grows microbes, how we feed them, and in fact, how these microscopic allies inside us, our microscopic garden or microscopic zoo, harvests a crop and gives us certain fruits from that harvest, which help us deal with various other problems that at first glance might seem completely unrelated. And we never used to think about this before. Be sure to share this video with friends and acquaintances who have high blood pressure, and let them also take a few steps to slightly change their eating habits. Make a small change to their diet and lower their blood pressure a bit. And we're not saying goodbye just yet. I'm looking forward to your comments. See you soon. Bye-bye.